Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. DrAndyRoark. Guys, I got a great one today. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Peter Weinstein. And if you don't know Peter Weinstein, you're in for a treat. He's a little bit hard to explain. He's a veterinarian. He is a former practice owner. He has been the practice management speaker of the year at VMX before. He teaches all over the place. He teaches vet students. He's been a mentor of mine since I was a vet student. He is a veterinary educator and disruptor are his terms. And I think that's fairly accurate. You're going to hear some heresy today. You're going to hear some ideas that are outside of the box. You are going to hear some he's going to poke some sacred cows. And it is an interesting idea conversation about the trust bank that we have with our support staff, that we have with pet owners, and we get into generally declining trust in society overall. If you have the feeling that we don't trust people and people don't trust us like they used to, this is going to be a great episode for you. So we really get into it and talk about it. Let's get into it.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. DrAndyRoark.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Peter Weinstein. Thanks for being here.
Dr. DrAndyRoark, always a pleasure to see you, hear you, speak to you.
I love having you on the podcast. I've had you on a number of times, and I always have just these fantastic conversations. I reached out to you recently, and I was like, hey, let's get back together. I want to talk to you about some stuff. What are you really excited about? And you immediately said, all right, we have trust issues in vet medicine. And I thought, okay, I have thoughts on what this means to me. And it was really in line with some things I've been looking at and seeing. But let's go ahead and just sort of open this up there. Peter, what do you mean when you say we have trust issues in veterinary medicine?
It's multifaceted. I think we have trust issues with our teams at times. I think we have trust issues with our clients. And I think veterinarians as a profession really have a hard time trusting people. And I don't know why. I can't really explain it. But I really do think that we have maybe created a wall or a thick skin around ourselves that just we're skeptical, cynical, and I'm cubby-holing everybody when I shouldn't be generalizing, but it feels at times that we really have trust issues.
Yeah. So let me give you a theory and see what you think about it. So I think that as a society overall, we are getting increasingly cynical. And I think modern media is a huge driver of that. I think tribalism is a huge driver of that. I think social media particularly is a huge driver of that. I think we've just got a lot of in-group, out-group things going on where it's like, you're with us or you're against us. And if you don't believe what we believe, you're one of those people. And there's a lot of don't trust that news source. Those people are lying. That's fake news. And it's just, that never used to be the case. And it's constant. So I think that there's this media push that has really made a lot of us cynical and deeply mistrusting. I think that when we see things on social media, I think that there is so there's four big drivers of social media that I saw recently. It's negativity, is just, that's full straight on. It's extremism, it's in-group, out-group language, and then it's emotional and moral language. And so those are the four big drivers. And if you think about those four drivers, negativity, tribalism, emotional and moral language, and extremism, none of those bode well for the status quo. None of those help us have any sort of trusting relationships. They're all driving towards these extreme views. And I think that's really a problem. And the last thing I would say is, I really think in the last 8 to 10 years, we've had a massive degradation of trust in institutions in our country, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's corporations, whether it's any, like, there used to be this general idea that these institutions were good and at least tried to sort of look out for people. And that's not the perception that a lot of people have anymore. And so I think that when I look at this, I go, I don't know that anybody trusts anybody like they did 20 years ago. So does that kind of jive with what you're thinking? Or do you think that vet medicine is even more extreme than that, or that it's different?
Thank you for joining me on the podcast today, Andy.
Thank you. Sorry, I get excited about this. I
know. No, I'm kidding. No, I think you did a great job of giving an overarching view of the polarization of our country. It used to be that the gap was the sidewalk crack between different beliefs. Now it's the Grand Canyon. I don't think veterinary medicine is any different than any other of the global issues that you talked about. I think we are embedded in it, so you feel it more. And so when you talk to staff members, and you do a lot of talking to staff members, you educate staff members, they're not always sure that they can trust the manager or the owner. To a degree, some of the national corporations have not necessarily strengthened trust within the practice modalities because they have approached a profession that is built on relationships and made it somewhat transactional. I think we have an economic environment right now, globally due to inflation, and within the veterinary profession, even more bloated inflation because the cost of care continues to grow, that has violated a trust with pet owners who are seeking a relationship. And we've had a profession that has always been very high in the respect categories, that I do think the cost of care has become a problem and violates trust from that standpoint. And I think in many ways, because the cost of products has gone up so high, we start to question our relationships and our trust even with industry. So I think we're living on a fault line with all of these things. And then you throw, as you talked about, social media and the news. Yeah. And I'm not sure that there's much difference between social media and the news. And I keep asking, where's Walter Cronkite? Now, you probably weren't born.
I remember Walter Cronkite. I was 8 years old and he was on TV.
Oh, very good. So, where is the real news? Where is the factual news? And I think a lot of, even in veterinary medicine, we expound on opinions because it's emotional. I mean, we have become so hyper. I like to think of veterinary medicine as a demyelinated nerve. We are so hyper reactive and so easily stimulated by just the smallest thing. We go off on clients. They go off on us. So that's what I meant by trust issues. It touches on everything that you brought forward as national issues, because that's how we are influenced. I mean, we've got 5 generations of people working in our veterinary hospitals, and we have 5 generations of clients, all of whom have different backgrounds, knowledges, and tools and resources they go to learn from.
Yeah. So there's a lot there to unpack. It's funny. I'm interested if you sort of agree with this. One of the things that I think has strained trust inside of individual practices is the move towards corporatization. And I'm not trying to be anti-corporate at all here, other than to say there is something innately stabilizing, maybe, when the person who owns the business is right there, shoulder to shoulder next to you. And you can turn to her and say, hey, Dr. Smith, can we talk about this decision? Or can I ask you why this is what we're doing? You know what I mean? And knowing Dr. Smith and saying, the organization has made a choice and the organization is really Dr. Smith, and we have lunch together. And it's sort of, I don't know how you can ever bring practices together and not necessarily have that. If you don't have that owner in the building with the rest of the people, it seems like you're always going to have to work to try to create organizational trust that was much easier to maintain when people were there. Now, granted, if Dr. Smith is toxic and terrible, there's already no trust. But does that decentralization of ownership, do you think that is part of why we see, I don't know, does that make it harder for teams to trust the practice they work in?
I sold to a corporation. And so for 15 years or so, I had a mom and pop organization, me and staff and management, that when there was an issue, they could come to me and say, hey, doc, the dryer is broken. What do I need to do? Yeah. And they didn't have to run it up the flagpole. Or we need to, look to hire somebody. And it didn't take, 3 memos, 2 texts, and a carrier pigeon. to get a decision made. Now, you own a business too, and you have a team. And when there are issues that arise, they can go directly to you. If somebody bought you and you had to go to somebody and say, well, I want to give Maria a raise. I'm not sure we can fit it into the budget this year, but she's really committed to the practice, and I'm afraid we're going to lose her if I don't do that. And they say, well, if it doesn't fit into the budget, we can't do it. What position does that put you in with Maria, for example? So I do think, corporate influence is still a very small percentage of the practices. It's a large percentage of the employees. But I think we have lost a little bit of that culture that comes with a legacy owner in a mom and pop organization that's part of the community that can make a decision to pivot. God, I hate that word because we used it so much during COVID, but that we could change, we could morph on a dime and not have to run things up to get decisions. So I would agree with you that sometimes we lose relationships when when the hierarchy becomes too vertical.
Yeah. We have this thing called recency bias, right? Where the things that are happening to us at present seem to carry much more weight than things that happened to us in the past. Do you really think that with industry, so you mentioned like product purchases and things like that, supplies, do you think that our relationship with industry really is different now than it was 20 or 30 years ago? Or were we complaining about prices going up in 1990 just as much as we are now, but it feels more, real. It feels more, I don't know, we're very much feeling the current changes, and we've kind of selectively forgotten that, oh yeah, no, this is how it's always been.
Well, this is how it's always been. But I think our nerve endings are rawer. I think we're more reactive and less responsive. I think I can go back to when I opened my hospital, which was 30 years ago, and we built relationships with our vendors. Mm-hmm. And I think to a degree, maybe the pandemic impacted it because the vendors couldn't come in and continue that relationship, and they were kept out in the parking lot, as were our clients. And maybe a lot of this feeling is because of that 3 to 4 years of pandemic period where our relationships became, there was a barrier, there was a wall between people. And I also think there's been a tremendous amount of turnover in industry that has diminished our ability to build relationships. Veterinary medicine is a relationship industry.
Yeah,
we have a relationship with our staff, we have a relationship with our clients, we have a relationship with vendors. I spent more in my practice with specific vendors because of that relationship. And I did not let certain vendors in because I couldn't stand them enough to want to have a relationship with them. I think some of what the pandemic did, and I think it did it to your kids, I think it's done it to other businesses, and I think we see it in all service industries, is that we have started to lose that loving feeling. And it's become transactional in many ways.
Hey guys, I just want to hop in real quick and let you know about my exam room communication toolkit. That's right, guys. I have team training on exam room skills. I don't think there is a better way for you to train your team than for the people going into the exam rooms to get together as a group, get some education, and then talk about how they do it in their practice. Do you guys do this? What does this look like? Can we talk about a time that you saw somebody do this in the practice? What did it look like? If you want to actually get people to change what they say and how they behave, you should train them together so they can discuss it. And that is why this training is made to be done in groups. It's made for teams. I have 17 different tools that I lay down, and they're each modular. You can break them up. You can tag them onto a staff meeting, 5 minutes, and then they all have discussion questions that will help you get your people to talk about what they do. But you can get the door open. You can get people being honest about the experience they have in the exam room, and you can get them making changes and raising their game in a way they feel good about, and not in a way that they feel scolded or they feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to do. It is a very positive way to learn and encourage. So anyway, that is at DrAndyRoark.com. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it is my exam room communication toolkit. I hope you'll check it out. Let's get back into this episode. So let me sort of ask you a question. It's sort of a cynicism test of Peter Weinstein.
Guaranteed.
So I just don't even need to ask the question. Just check. All right. So I wrote this article on a couple weeks ago, and I put it out because there was this thing on social media, and this guy was raging about the cost of vet services, and he was specifically talking about the markup of diagnostic prices, and he was just really upset. And this thing got a lot of attention. And of course, I really love your demyelinated nerve example, because the vet community really flared up at this and being criticized this way. And I think this criticism is unfair, and I'm not going to get into it more than that. But what he was saying, in my opinion, was it did not make sense. It was not fair. But he was very adamant, and people responded to that. So I wrote this piece, and I was telling my brother about it. And he kind of laughed, and he said, Andy, I'm a lawyer, and I'm having a hard time getting too worked up about the fact that there's a random person bashing your profession online. Like, that's just, imagine being a lawyer. And I've thought about that because my brother is a great guy. He's a good person. He does end of life planning. So he writes wills, which is like, he's very much a relationship person and a wonderful person. And if he cared about what the general populace thought of lawyers, there would be no end to it. There's no out. And so my question to you, the cynicism check here is, Peter, do we even care, or should we even care what the overall perception of our profession is? Or are we going to a place where, like the lawyers, we have a service and it's a vital service, and people just crap on lawyers all the time, and we don't look at that? Auto mechanics, I had to go get my 60,000 mile checkup, and I did not have warm fuzzy feelings about the car dealership, but I paid the bill and I went on, and I'll probably go back for 90,000 miles. You know what I mean? Is that where we're heading, or do you think that there's a different path?
I think, first of all, I don't want to look like a lawyer, because, as Shakespeare said, kill all the lawyers. But I think we are hyper reactive. I've probably written, and I know you've written comments about the online reviews that come through
Yes.
Yelp and Google and everything else, and how many clients bash us from that standpoint. And I know, and you haven't been in practice as long as I have. Well, you've probably been in practice longer, since I haven't been in practice in a while, but it's our reptilian brain that has us remember every negative experience that we have.
Yeah.
And so we are so hyper reactive. Somebody said, what should you do with negative online reviews? I said, don't respond to them. Have somebody else screen them for you, because you will never sleep again at night with one negative online review, because that's how sensitive we are as a profession. And it's good about us and it's bad about us. So when this doctor goes on a tirade because of our markups for lab, it shows a variety of different things. It just shows a lack of understanding and knowledge about the business model of a small business versus an industry that is run by the insurance companies and big business. But we reacted to it very personally. Each and every one of us took it to heart as if it were us.
Yeah.
And it's not us. It's just, that's the way we are. And part of it is because and you asked me how I want to describe myself earlier, and I said, as a disruptor and an advocator and an educator, we as a profession haven't really done a great job of being cheerleaders for ourselves. We don't go out there rah-rah about veterinary medicine and talk about all the great things we do. We spend a lot of time being defensive instead of being supportive. And so I really do think that when we can bring a group together, as came together online, to defend ourselves, I think it's a great thing. And I do think that we should be doing it before the fecal material hits the oscillator, and, take and do a much better job of advocating for ourselves, because nobody else is advocating for us.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that answer. That is to me that is a strong pushback against cynicism. I really like this. We're going to take the bull by the horns and start to explain to people and continue to explain to people what we do and why we do it. I like that a lot. I wonder if that is going to inform this next question. So I had this as, you start talking, and we talk about a trust issue, and you've been kind of retired for a while now. You're really not good at retirement. Like you're really the worst person at retirement I've ever seen. But your daughter is a veterinarian and a fairly recent graduate. What is your advice to her, right? Because she's coming into this. And so, it's funny, I was looking at the Merck well-being study pretty recently, and that I don't think that thing gets enough attention for what it is. But it really highlighted that young doctors fairly recently out of vet school are the doctors who often struggle the most in our profession. And then I don't know whether you get crotchetier as you go along, or if enough people leave and the only ones left are the people who are kind of dead inside. I don't know, but given that she's a young doctor, what advice do you give to her? Like, what's the action steps for her? What's the takeaway?
Well, as somebody who's dead inside,
fellow dead inside doctor,
my advice to her, and a lot of it comes with confidence, and most of our recent graduates don't graduate from veterinary school with a lot of confidence. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that we propagate throughout the veterinary education model. And so my comments to Brooke, who's in Australia practicing, is, you're going to have hard times, but don't take them personally.
Yeah.
And she had a questionable first job, didn't really get the support she needed from her owner mentor. And she's been doing some per diem work as she waits for some visa updates. Mm-hmm. And they've been very supportive and very positive and very complimentary. But what do you remember? We tend to remember the negative stuff. I mean, that's a natural reflex from that standpoint. So I think it's important, and I was interviewed for something else recently, and I think what we need to do, you and I and all the other veterinarians who've been out in private practice, is we need to get into the veterinary schools and have a greater voice to the veterinary students about what to expect after graduation. I don't think that we have given a lot of the veterinary students a knowledge enough about what life is after graduation. And I do think we should be teaching. I teach at Western. I do a lot of VBMA talks, as do you. But I do think that we need to be in there advocating with the students about, here's how to deal with some of these challenges. And I agree with you, the Merck study is good. I think a lot of it points out to the financial challenges as a cause for the issues. And the financial challenges stem from client communication.
Yeah.
And they stem from cost of care. And they stem from clients declining services from that standpoint. And they also deal with salaries as well as student debt. So there are so many variables. This is a multivariate, very complex veterinary profession with very sensitive people who are demyelinated nerves being unsure how to deal with negative outcomes. And a negative outcome is a review. A negative outcome is a review from a client. A negative outcome is a review from a boss or a manager. A negative outcome is even just, how long it takes to get through the day. And we don't, how many freaking professions, Andy, get to play with puppies and kittens all day? I mean, do you want to be a proctologist and stick a tube up a dark hole? Do you want to be a dentist and look at the other end and see the proctologist at the far end?
No. I say that all the time when I walk into the exam room and the pet owner says, "How are you doing?" And I just say, "This is my job. I mean, how can it not be great?" And they like that. It's what they want to hear. And I do believe it. Let's imagine for a second that the profession is a ship. The profession is a ship, and you get to put your hand on the rudder. So that sort of, if I could sort of steer the profession as a whole, what would you do in the next 5 years to try to address the financial concerns or this financial stress? Because you're spot on. Inflation is going up, much faster in vet medicine than the general population. And I agree. I think pet owners are not dumb. They see it. We all see prices going up at the vet clinic, and we all hear comments about it. I don't know what the immediate fix is, but if you had the professional rudder and could actually steer the profession as a whole, what would you try to see, or what would you like to see in a way to try to relieve this pressure?
Wow. I feel like I'm dealing with a cat bite abscess and I'm just waiting for the pus to come out. I jest, and I was quoted on this not that long ago, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, that veterinary medicine would be great if we had socialized veterinary medicine, where you and I as veterinarians could go into an exam room and for a small copay, go in and provide the best care that the pet needed. And the client would just be able to receive the care and the medications and everything else at a reasonable cost. And we could be doctors and we could educate. I think education is an extremely important aspect of veterinary medicine. And everybody who's listening to this, when you graduate from veterinary school, you go from student to teacher. And every time you walk into the exam room, every time you go back into the treatment area, every time you get on the phone, every time you hit the keyboard on your computer or your phone, you're a teacher. And so I'm digressing for just a minute, but socialized veterinary medicine. So and with that, we as veterinarians would be paid a fair and equitable salary for the work that we do. But we don't have to talk about the cost of care. How much less stressful would that be from that standpoint? Now, clients could still choose to go to a PPO, and we could have PPO practices out there as well for those clients who wanted it. And we could look to see how we could subsidize things more with companies like Care Credit or some of the pet health insurance companies from that standpoint. But I just think a lot of our stressors come from self-value and clients who are declining services that you know would be beneficial to the pet. And they're declining it for two reasons. One, they can't afford it. And two, they don't understand it. And there's probably some other things in between. But I think it's our failure to clarify the why behind the what of everything we do. And that's the biggest difference in the last 20 years, Andy, is because of the internet. Clients can get all sorts of disinformation that force us to talk more about why we do everything we do when we used to just be able to talk about what we need to do. So I'm all for socialized veterinary medicine. Now, it'll never happen, but if we could do that, that would be one thing. Let me continue my thought process if I can for just a minute. I think that there has to be a way to subsidize the cost of veterinary education through more scholarships.
Yeah.
So that when veterinary students graduate, they have a 1-to-1 debt-to-income ratio so that they're not at $250,000 in debt or $180,000 in debt and a salary of $120,000. And I think there needs to be some more subsidization. And this is where I touch on industry as well and other resources. So we can take some of that out of the picture. And I think we need to look in our business models as to what we can do to improve our efficiencies so we can keep our profitability where it is, but be able to not continue to escalate the cost of care to clients, which to me is one of the biggest stressors, is not being able to provide optimal patient care because the cost is in the way, and knowing that that pet is not going to receive what it really needs.
Dr. Peter Weinstein, thank you so much for being here and talking with me. I really appreciate it. You have a new course online that I just saw. It's a program that you have for entrepreneurs. It's for people who are interested in starting practices, things like that. Tell me a little bit about that and where people can find it.
Well, Andy, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, A, to be on the podcast, and B, to talk a little bit about one of my passions. As you and I have spoken since you were just a baby in veterinary school. For those of you who don't know, I knew Andy before he knew himself. I have a big passion for independent veterinary hospitals. I do think there's a definite place for corporations in the veterinary profession, but I would really love to see the growth of entrepreneurship. And so Dr. Dan Markwalder and myself created a program. He's one of the voices on the recordings. We created 24 hours of race-approved CE that basically take you from soup to nuts, or from finding a location to looking for a new location after you've grown your practice, of online education. It's in 47 30-minute modules that you can watch at the convenience from your home. And we call it Veterinary Ownership Advocates. And really what it's focused on is people who are looking to buy a practice, looking to do a startup, or even young entrepreneurs who already have their practice up and going, and they're trying to find more information about how to do things. And so the website is www.veterinaryownrshipadvocates.com, all spelled out. Yeah, I should have found a smaller URL, but I didn't. So veterinaryownship.advocates.com, and it's really focused on helping stimulate entrepreneurship in the veterinary profession. And it includes monthly mastermind calls where we will meet with the members of the Veterinary Ownership Advocates community to talk about some of the issues, problem solve, and share best practices. And so it can be focused at veterinarians, it can be focused at practice managers, it can be focused at technicians, but anybody who is looking to and interested in being a hospital owner.
Gotcha. Cool. I will link all that up in the show notes where people can find it. Peter, thanks for being here. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, everybody.
Thanks, Andy.
And that's it. That's what I got. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks to Peter for being here. Guys, if you enjoy conversations like this, maybe you should try out my newsletter. I have the Dr. Andy Roark newsletter. You can sign up at DrAndyRoark.com. It's totally free. I write for it every week. And so I often think about these types of things. And this is kind of the stuff I write about there. And so anyway, like I said, it's totally free and I write for it every week. If you're interested in it, go over to DrAndyRoark.com and check out our free newsletter. Anyway, guys, thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Goodbye.